Hello once again from the bright radiance and collateral light starships. I am Will Pena, and this is my design diary. I'm starting out with the same kind of intro that I've given the past couple weeks that I haven't had a ton of time to design this week. But hopefully that will change in this next upcoming week because I have a week off work. So that'll be nice. And I think I'll be diving into a lot of Pathfinder encounter design. So I'm really looking forward to that. But in this past week, let's see what we've done. I watched a couple of videos, mostly Matt Colville's Designing the Game series, which has been just so much fun to watch and such a privilege to be able to get a look behind the screen at that design process for a whole brand new game by experienced designers. I'm not part of the Patreon, but it's cool that we still get a free option to get some of this stuff explained to us. So first we'll start with the attack episode of Designing the Game, talking about Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition specifically, but I think all editions. Rolling to hit does not model a heroic narrative, is a quote that I wrote down. He goes on to explain that rolling to hit comes from the ancestry of war games, where you had a whole battalion and you'd roll 15 dice at a time, see how many of them hit, right? But when you're going with each player controls only one character, rolling one dice, I miss, pass the turn, is not exactly a heroic narrative. It doesn't tell a great story, which is what I think in a lot of modern Dungeons & Dragons, players are trying to do. It's the null result that we talked about earlier. And so in his game, you just roll directly for damage. It's automatically assumed you hit. It's just about how much damage you do. He uses armor in a different way, and that armor reduces incoming damage, and it can reduce it to 0. And then later on, you could do a counterattack, or then change it to just being a counter instead of being an attack because you don't roll for the attack. I won't get into his design. This is my design diary. But it talks about how there are those abstractions that you have to make in game design of I put heavy armor on and it just raises my AC. It doesn't, reduce my movement. And hey, wouldn't I actually be kind of easier to hit with heavy armor on? But it just wouldn't hit me as hard. I'd be better protected, so it would reduce the damage. There's all kinds of abstractions that you have to do in any kind of RPG. And something that he said that I thought was just kind of cute, and that I liked a lot was, our game will have equally arbitrary abstractions. They'll just be ours. Which just, I don't know, made me kind of happy about the idea of, everyone's got to do these things and we'll design them. And, the things that some people will think are silly and, obtuse in other games we'll have our own versions of those. But they'll be nice because they'll be ours. They're the ones that we decided to have. Later on that week, I started another Magic deck with the help of some friends. I had this idea for a little while of where's the beginning of the story. One of the first decks I ever built was a Kenrith Politics deck, and as I was running it, I figured out that I had the most fun by actually role playing myself as a king and trying to ingratiate myself to the other kingdoms, being the other players. And it's just a lot of fun to just kind of mess around with the social conventions of a Magic the Gathering game with, friends that I know instead of at the LGS. But it's fun to just have a role-playing aspect to a Magic the Gathering game. So I loved being the king, and so I made a whole deck focused around that. It wasn't just politics, it was about being a king, and I actually haven't really gotten to try that deck too much, but it will be very fun once I get there. And I wanted to narrow down on one aspect of that deck build that I thought was fun but underserved, which was the actual castle part of the deck. Because walls have been a creature type, walls have been part of Magic the Gathering for a very long time, since I think Alpha, and they became a creature type when they switched all those things over. And I just had the idea. I think there was that, and then I saw the card Moat, and I was like, oh, if I had a moat and a few walls, I could build a castle for my kingdom. And there's something about that that's always just kind of stayed a little thought in my head in the background when I played this king deck, that like, oh, I want to actually like build a castle for myself. So I've been going through and trying to find some, and then my good friend Jake suggested Arcades something strategist as the commander instead of doing the same like 5-color Kenrith kind of thing, because Kenrith has the ability to let your walls attack, like kind of ignore their defender rules text. And that seemed like a lot of fun. And yeah, I'm going through Scryfall. I'm kind of adding any kind of like, furniture or architecture reference. Here, let me pull it up right now and see a couple of examples that I have. I might end up making like a full deck tech video about that, which I think is very funny to make a deck tech for a deck that doesn't, totally isn't good. This is not going to end up being like a competitive or even like, I doubt this will win any games. But it's just really funny, this idea to like build things. So I got Alabaster Wall. I have Archer's Parapet is very fun for me because I can see it all coming together. I am a wizard summoning a giant castle around me to fight other wizards, and that just seems like a really fun to me. Because like, what kind of wizard is that? What kind of planeswalker needs a castle in order to fight the other planeswalkers? Armory Mice is a very cute card. I like having some creatures that aren't necessarily walls, that I can that have like very specific jobs within the castle. There's also Moat Piranhas. I've been thinking, I don't know if I will have because I have Moat and I have Moat Piranhas. Should I have to cast Moat before I cast Moat Piranhas? Terrible strategy. I would need to draw Moat before I draw Moat Piranhas, and I have no control over that, or at least very little control over that. But it is the most flavorful, and this is a flavorful deck, So I'll have to figure out some stuff on that. The Rug of Smothering. I do have some win cons. I have the Door to Nothingness in this because it's just, an inconspicuous door. And we've added some other like Cryptic Gateway. My friend Riley, who has been mentioned on this series before, suggested it kind of be like the Winchester House of castles, which I think makes a lot of sense and is a lot of fun because it is a wizard's castle, and a wizard would build a castle in a different way than a human in the 21st century would build a castle. So it's been fun to kind of bend and twist around that. So hopefully we'll have some more updates with that later. Maybe it'll have a full video unto itself. Next up, we have actually before this, I have another update on Allegra's spell list. Allegra being my pirate character that is kind of maybe getting its own homebrew subclass of wizard or something. We're still trying to figure it out. I need to talk to Riley and Jake actually about it. But the big thing I did this time was I had made that rough draft custom spell list, and we just needed a point of comparison to other spell lists. So I took it by the numbers and counted the number of non-UA spells in every class's spell list. I think I may have ignored some Acquisitions Incorporated, like some stuff that I feel is closer to third party. I don't know how popular that Acquisitions Incorporated book is. It seems like it's got some cool stuff. It has like Distort Value and not Glibness, but the other one that lets you like take back whatever you said in the last 6 seconds. So there's definitely some cool stuff in there, but I just hardly ever see it used. So maybe it's just maybe it's a hidden treasure. I don't know. But I took like most of the main spells, all of the main spells from each class, being Cleric, Bard, Wizard, and the class that we're working on, which is the compass or the legend, somewhere in that area. It's very nautical terms, map making terms, and counted them all up. Wizards have so many spells. Wizards have far too many spells. So roughly, first I just compared it to the wizard, and the compass had about half as many spells per level as the wizard did. It has more spells per level than the cleric, and about equal spells per level to the bard, which is interesting because mechanically it's most similar to the wizard in terms of maybe even not. It's not mechanically because we don't even know what the mechanics are yet, but like kind of flavorfully, it would make most sense as a wizard subclass. But not all the wizard spells make sense for it, and there's quite a few spells from other classes that I think would work really well. So that's what we're trying to figure out. That's the kind of main problem at this point. And another big thing to consider is the way that all these classes prepare their spells. So cleric has like the least number of spells to choose from, but they can choose any of them every single day. Whereas bard has like a medium amount, but they only get to choose new spells every level. But to kind of make up for that, they have the most number of class features, it seems like, or maybe the most wide-ranging class features. Whereas wizard has not that many class features. There's entire levels where you don't get anything at all, like multiple levels. But their kind of class features are a little bit built into their spell list, and they can prepare a number of spells per day, similar to cleric, but only from the spells that they have in their spell book, which is a really interesting mechanic, but is really like how many spells are you going to find in the world. So that's kind of dependent from campaign to campaign. So it's a combination of, hey, is this like a reasonable spell list for the compass? How will the compass prepare their spells? As much as I like the way that wizards do it, I think it's like super cool, super fun, and I've never actually played a wizard before in a long-term campaign, so I would love to get that opportunity. I actually don't really think it makes a ton of sense looking at the spell list for it to be that way. I think maybe the cleric style makes more sense. I don't know. I feel like I'm really rambling on this one, but my thoughts are kind of all over the place. I think now it's difficult to design this kind of thing because you want it to be a kind of straight trajectory towards being done. It's like, oh, I did this, and now I get to do this, and then once I do these two more things, I will be finished, and I will have like a finished D&D subclass and spell list. But in reality, it ends up like, okay, it's kind of like building like a sandcastle out of like really runny mud. It's like, okay, I'll build this thing up right here, and it's kind of sliding back down, and it's like, okay, I'll let that dry for a minute, and I'll move over to this parapet, and I'll like build it up, and I'll have a better shape of like, oh, okay, so that's what that looks like. Now I got to turn back to this like other thing that I started a while ago and kind of build that up too. It's there's a lot of moving parts, and every single one affects the other, and it's exciting. It's super fun. I'm having a great time trying to do this, but it is not the direct route to finished that I would sometimes, imagine it would be. But that's all part of designing, So that's most of my original design. One last thing, I think, for this video, again, kind of a shorter one this week, is Matt Colville's dice video, where he discusses the way they've gotten to the dice system that they use now in their game that's in development. And they at first were using custom dice, like unique dice for their game, and they pointed to some other games that used them before. I think specifically the Star Wars, like Age of Empires one, which I think I can't remember if I own that one or another Star Wars game. Where'd it go? Star Wars. I have misplaced the Star Wars. That's okay though. But the dice in that game had different effects on each side and different symbols that meant different things, and some of them had like multiple symbols on the same side of the dice, so it was all very interesting, kind of like these Seinfeld dice right here. Can I make a game that uses these Seinfeld dice? Can I make a Seinfeld RPG? A sitcom RPG would definitely work, and you could have a class system that would have like the Jerry type, like the straight man, and then there's like, we'll check in on this later. I will write this down right now as a sitcom RPG. But like it's obviously not combat. It's like it's a social thing. We'll see. And we can use the Seinfeld dice. Oh, maybe someday. Where was I? The dice. I'll just go to one of these quotes. I love dice math. I love figuring out the statistics on every roll that I can possibly do and trying my best to do it off the top of my head. And this was something that framed all of the single dice rolls very well for me. Where Matt Colville said, on a D8, there is one side that is worth 8 times as much as another side, and they are both equally likely outcomes. Which just kind of framed that in my head in a very nice way, of like how swingy single dice rolls are, especially the higher you get with each of them. Like D10, D12 was even, a higher variance than that. And that's why they, in their game, ended up going with a 2d6 system, where, because that, instead of, a straight line of equally likely outcomes, has kind of more of a bell curve, where like areas around the 6 are more likely to be a result than the 2 or the 12. And I think that's really interesting. I think that comes down more to a matter of taste between players and designers. Some people really like that big swinginess of rolling a d12 on, I think it's a battle axe that has that as an option in D&D 5e, or a long sword, broadsword, heavy sword, something like that has a 2d6 option. Some people really like the variant. Some people really like getting to hit a 12 more often, even if that means that sometimes they're gonna roll a 1. And some people like doing a nice solid amount of damage every turn. That's usually somewhere around 6 or 7 damage. I think it's actually 7 or 8. Usually around 7 damage. And so I think Matt Colville, great video, frames it all very well for his design, but doesn't necessarily take into account that that high variance is very fun for a certain group of people. So I think it has its place in game design. I don't think we should completely move away from single dice as an option, but it's definitely, the math is always worth considering, because it has so much of an effect on the game and the game feel for the players. I think that is about all. Like I said, there's going to be some Pathfinder encounter design coming up. This week should be a wealth of game design. It's what I'm hoping to spend most of my free time on. Now that I don't have work this week. So hopefully next week's design diary will just be a bevy of fun design stuff that I get to share with you. But I'm happy with this last week. Again, just more busy with work than I thought. Had a couple of days where I had to stay late. And ended up, just doing some fun little wacky stuff with the spell lists and the magic deck. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, listening to what I have to say about the design. And I will see you next week. Goodbye.